So, hi, Nasir. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Next in Line podcast. We're very excited to have you on our show. Before we get started, I did want you to kind of introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your career journey, and how you got to where you're at today.
Yeah, no, thank you, Karina. I appreciate it. Thank you for the listeners as well. I'll keep my intro short. As I mentioned earlier before the recording, is I want to add a value to our listeners. So we'll get to the juicy topics about AI and what's happening in that field. But I was born in a foreign country, Pakistan, but I grew up in New York. I was very young when I came there, so I have zero recollection of my own birthplace. But I grew up in New York and then kind of fast forward, came into the corporate world. But I got recruited through a hackathon. My initial journey was really around programming and coding, and I started to learn C++ and Java scripts early on. So I got recruited through a hackathon. I got picked up by defense. I worked for defense for about close to 14, 15 years. That's a bit of a black box. I've been around the world, fortunate enough to do that, but really can't get into that detail. However, it was exciting. It was definitely exciting and rewarding career, and I would do it again if I have the chance and they ask me again to do it. But then I came back and then I joined Big Fours. I did my stint with Big Fours in different roles as an executive in the firms. Led a lot of large scale migrations around cloud, from legacy to cloud, from monolithic to green apps. So did a lot of that, cool stuff back in the days. Matter of fact, when I started Accenture, I was one of their first certified hire for the cloud to lead their Accenture AWS business group for North America for architects. So that was a good
Oh,
journey, a
wow.
lot of learning there. And then I transitioned into Deloitte and then obviously PwC. In between, I had a chance to work with Andy Jesse's initiative for a huge $1 billion initiative for DXC transformation, which was one of the clients, which is public knowledge. So learned a lot from there. I did a couple of startups in between, had two good exits. One didn't work too well. It was a trial and error, and here we are, kind of looking at the next frontier. And just sort of a context, I've been dabbling with sort of AI since the beginning of the journey, because writing code and writing algorithms. So this was a natural
Yeah.
sort of fit for me. And I mean, I've done a lot of roles in emerging technology, so really I saw an opportunity to come in and really try to contribute to the economy. So here we are, and now I'm based out of Dallas. And it's beautiful out here.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing your journey. And I want you to kind of, double down on maybe some of those key moments that shaped your career, especially from being a cloud architect all the way to now owning your own business, being a CEO, being a part of multiple startups throughout your journey. What were some pivotal moments there for you?
I will tell you this. The I think let's start with this the desire. That'll give you some sort of like an anchor and then starting point. As I was dealing with multi-billion-dollar corporations around the world and literally kind of going around the world and helping them transform from legacy to modernized systems, what I always felt was that there was no win-win situation. And this is a bit of it's sort of a self-reflective moment as well, because I'm delivering the service, right? So it's like you come in with a proposition that it is a win-win, but you don't really fundamentally believe that there is a win-win situation. It's a bit controversial there, but I've always been sort of looking from a lens of how can we make sure that the customer also wins as much as we win when we come in as a consultant to deliver value. And what I noticed was a couple of things that really sort of gave me the trajectory on what I needed to be. One of the key thing was the high adoption curve for change. So anytime there was a change, there was always that difficulty of adapting to that change. And again, just for your listeners, the key to adopting a change is really the education piece, is learning. And just like everything else, change is a skill you have to acquire. It's not something that you could just get it. You really have to
Yeah.
pursue and adapt to that and learn and sort of embrace it. So that was one of the things that I noticed is like there's always that sort of high learning curve and there's a resistance, right? Because when you typical sort of methodologies, when you show up with something that has to do with automation, especially technology, there's a pushback because it has to do with jobs, right? So there's a job security aspect. So the high learning curve for change was one. The second thing that I noticed was, although that there were sort of key elements to defining the right architecture, but no one was defining the right model, right? So there's an operating model and there's a business model. So what I noticed was is if you can educate for the change and really educate the client on what the right infrastructure needs to be in terms of really mining the intelligence, it can go a long ways. They can really get the ROI. And that sort of that theme kept sort of replaying itself over and over in every transition that I made. And that really what was the sort of the catalyst for me to get in and start to do my own ventures where I could do this without sort of, well, I mean, this is a word I'd use it carefully, is without guards, right? So I would experiment things and I would then kind of like really go bold at it. And I really, I mean, there was a lot of learning along the way, but it showed me some of the things that I wouldn't have discovered otherwise. And that is what brought me to where I am today.
That's awesome. And I know throughout the journey of, leaping into entrepreneurship, starting your own business, it comes with a lot of risk too that many people may not know too, especially that next gen that we're speaking to. So
Yes.
would you say there are any challenges that you faced or any, risky, decisions you made along the way that kind of shaped that journey as well?
Plenty of them, Karina. I mean, I'd say as a startup founder or anybody who's actually looking to venture into startup, be prepared for sleepless nights, right? I mean, there's a lot of sort of
Absolutely.
stuff that goes on. And then you've got to be able to wear multiple hats. So typical industry norm, you go into a corporate world, you have role to play in, you have a swim lane to swim in, where you can rely on other people with different skill set. But when you do your startups, you're everything. You're a project manager,
Exactly.
you're a sales guy, you're a technical guy, you're the CEO, you're the CTO, you're the staff. So really kind of embracing that mindset will definitely catapult any founder or innovator that's looking to make a change. In terms of risks, it goes without saying you have to take risks. One thing that I coach a lot of people and they ask me, how do you differentiate in terms of how do you take risks? It has to do with
Yeah.
prioritization, right? So you prioritize. For me, and for your listeners, obviously, for me personally, is I look at my family, my health, and my business. I categorize in that sense, and then I start to kind of really stack. Okay, what's critical here in these areas, and how can I deliver those? And if there's something that's coming in the way, it's a noise, right? So I got to stay focused on that. However, with that mindset, there are risks you have to take, right?
Yeah.
Because there are other opportunities that you might sort of gravitate towards saying that's, hey, it's a shiny object, let me go chase it. It might be good or bad, you don't know, because what you want to do is one of my mentors used to tell me, side digression and side note is, he said, Nas, revenue is where focus is. And any startup that's coming in, they're building something, contributing something at the end of the day to make some money, to earn some revenue.
Yeah.
And you do that with laser focus. So the risk is that you might lose some opportunity, but if you stay focused, you'll cultivate quite a bit. For me, I mean, I've taken multiple risks on different fronts, both from a personal perspective and also monetarily perspective. Did they pay off? Fortunate enough to say that 90% of the risks I've taken did pay off, but there's a lot of learnings that
Yeah.
happen along the way, right? So there's a ton of failures that I went through, and perhaps in future we can discuss just the podcast on the failures. I think that'd be more juicy and interesting. But again, but that's what makes you better, right? That's what makes you grow
Exactly.
faster because you learn things that you've never done before, and there's a muscle memory that you work on when you're actually taking these risks. But what I would say, and that goes without saying, is anybody who's willing to take these risks, do your calculation. A risk that is calculated is far better than the risk that's uncalculated or non-calculated. So do your data looks. Typically what I say is my mantra is that if you can look at the data and you can extrapolate some intelligence, and then you pair that with your intuition, which is gut feel, and if the answer is yes, go pursue it, hands down. But if there's a disconnect and there's a disparity between these two elements, do your do
Yeah.
your calculation and then take risks.
I like that advice. I'm taking note of that myself too. And now, talking throughout your journey and your story that you just shared with us, you've talked about leading through transformation.
Yes.
And with that, what does that actually look like in practice for you?
Yeah. So leading through transformation, there's one thing typically you'll see in the industry, and especially when it comes to AI, there's a lot of hype, right? There's a lot of sort of demystifying of AI that is, there's a void, right? So when you go to a client and you want to say, hey, we can do something, how do you actually show them that this adds a value, right? There's an
Yeah.
aspect of kind of leading by examples. And it's actually a good sort of point where we can start to talk about why we do what we do in terms of our firm's offering. And in a typical industry model, when you go to a big four consulting company or mid-tier consulting company, typically being a consultant, a customer hires you, you come in and you say, okay, here's our statement of work, sign it, and then we're going to send some bodies to get the work done. And again, it goes back to the couple of points I made earlier about win-win situation. But leading by example is the clients typically want to see the change that this particular technology would make before they actually buy it. To
Yeah,
remove that barrier, and it also serves sort of a twofold where if you can give them something where they can see it, it creates a win-win situation, right? It kind of gives them something that they don't have any financial commitment, but obviously there's a little bit of time commitment where they come in and they say, hey, we're going to spend an hour or 30 minutes with you to give you an idea of what the problem is. But then what you do is you basically take their challenge, take their problem, turn into a functional prototype, and show them how this particular challenge and problem can be solved using AI in AI. It goes far beyond than me trying to sort of convince them, right? So if
exactly.
you want to make a leap in transformation, one of the biggest hurdle to adoption is how much investment am I going to make? What does it take for what are and they have to assess their risk appetite, and then obviously a lot of the nuances that go around the report in terms of like if you were to put something that's critical on new technology without knowing, there's a lot of report risk. So doing this, it kind of gives them what I call show and tell and feel. They can interact with a prototype, they can play with it, they can see how these problems are solved in the technology, and that's what I call lead by examples, right? In the innovation space. And when you do
Yeah,
that, it dismantles a lot of the stuff, which is one being myth, right? So now they see it in reality, say, okay, now I get it, how this technology can solve my problem. Now let's scale it. And at the same token, this is one of the propositions that we do is again, we try to create win-win situation, right? Where there's
absolutely.
no financial commitment off from you. The only commitment we ask of you is sign the NDA to protect our conversation, give us a 30-minute discussion point where we can collect some data from you, describe us what your challenge and problem is, give us a vision, and we'll give you a functional prototype, no financial commitment whatsoever. You decide if you want to take it, right? So
Very
when you do that at sort of a massive scale, when I say massive, I'm talking about serving a lot of clients, right? This is where you start to make the change, both in terms of adoption curve and how the technology is being sort of looked at and
yeah.
reviewed at, right? So that changes a lot. To me, and again, it all has to do, even the aspect of creating these prototype has to do fundamentally with education. So if you can show them, and this is how this technology can make a difference and educate them so they can ask you right questions. One of the things, again, side note is for me, the educated customers are the best customers because they ask you the tough questions and they will ask you the
Yeah.
right questions because then they know the technology. Because we're here to grow with the customer, right? We're here to grow and learn because sometimes, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, some of the problems that we face, they're very unique in the sense that probably haven't seen in other sector. So for us
Yeah.
to claim that we're the expert, we're expert at definitely AI and technology, but solving that for that industry, we grow with them, which is a phenomenal learning curve. But again, just to simply answer your question about it, leading with sort of examples on innovation front, that's typically how we approach, and that's how typically the industry should, where they kind of give the customers or the enterprises touch and feel, show them the art of the possible, show them how the business case is being solved, and then let that speak volume.
Yeah, for sure. And it gets you they're a lot faster when you're showing them a prototype versus maybe even a presentation in a deck and
Yeah,
going through the typical, sales pitch. You have something in front of you that you can actually look and feel and mess around
correct.
with. And I think that's just the way, the industry is going, especially with AI.
Yes.
And, speaking about AI and that topic, where do you see it headed in this new year in 2026 and even beyond? Because it's evolving, constantly.
Yeah, Karina, so that's a real good question. I've been asked that many times. For our listeners, I would actually start out with a little bit of context. What we have, I mean, we're basically in sort of a fourth wave of evolution when it comes to AI or the
Yeah.
technology in whole. It started back in 1940 to 1970. We were in the era of cybernetics. These were sort of the AI being used in the field of research areas, right? So the systems that were actually just geared toward a specific clinical research. They were using AI back in the days. And then came really the trained experts. These were the models where, they were actually kind of like think of it as like in the Air Force, they used to use these actuators. These were expert systems. They were trained for specific tasks, right? And they had all the data to train them. So this was back in 1980, 1990. And then from there came the sort of the evolution of the smart learners, which we call good learners. I mean, these are the CNN and RNNs, which really what you saw with Netflix and Amazon and these, sort of places where you go and you see that, hey, because you watched this, you might like this. It's recommendation. These are actually CNN and RNNs working hard. Now, side note for your listeners, CNN, convolutional neural network and regenerative neural network. These are the bedrocks for AI and Gen AI, which we'll talk about it. And now you are in actually the fourth phase, which is generative AI. Now, to
Yeah.
kind of set the context of the conversation, just to give you a little bit of a sort of a baseline, if there is a difference between a traditional AI and then the generative AI. Traditional AI is pattern driven. So you give me historical pattern, I see something that I can look at, and I will try to look in the data that I see now. And if I see a pattern, I'll pull up and I'll show you. Generative AI, as the word generative, it generates something new, right? Which is kind of like it's not a traditional AI. So if Karina was the first person to talk to ChatGPT, and if you were to say, I give this example to everybody is, if you were to say, hey, show me cat in space, ChatGPT, like tools, had no idea because they never knew what cat in space looked like. But then if you were
Yeah.
to upload a picture of a cat and then a space, separate picture, then you say, now give me cat in space, it can see and it can generate something new. Hence the ChatGPT. And GPT, again, is pre-trained generative transformers. So that's why Gen AI, I mean, you have to really understand this aspect of that it's actually it's purpose built for cases where you're actually collecting data and trying to mine new intelligence out of it. Now, with all of that said, and you talked about where we're going, and I'm going to go sort of 100 foot, 1,000 foot view on this is today even though we have generative AI, but there's one thing that lacks, which will catapult the innovation to next frontier, where we, people like us, or even the experts that are beyond me, talk about singularity, right? So you talked about where it's going to be in 2030 or it's beyond. One of the key thing that the listeners or people like me have to keep an eye on is the advent or the innovation in what I call is general artificial intelligence, AGI. Very, very important. The key difference between today's intelligence and the AGI, which is general artificial intelligence, is the aspect of infer learning. Now, what does that
Yeah.
mean, infer learning? So today's system, I mean, there's a reason Tesla drives millions of miles to make the autopilot perfect because you can't basically train the Tesla autopilot in my neighborhood and say now you could drive the world because it hasn't seen other nooks and crannies and stop signs and wedges, so it's not going to operate well. That's because there's no such thing in the AI that's called infer learning. In other words, if I say, Karina, let me teach you how to ride a bike in my neighborhood, therefore Karina can drive or ride a bike anywhere in the world, right? It's called
Yeah.
infer learning. So you can infer that from the learning experience that you've had. AI doesn't have that today, but the AGI will unlock it, right? So once the
Yeah.
AGI becomes mainstream, then it's anybody's guess where the industry is going to head toward because that gives the AI really that brings AI to closer to human, right? That's where the sort of the transcendence starts to happen. And then there's the next aspect, which we're not going to talk about today, which is super intelligence, right? Which is the next
Yeah.
level up. But if listeners can pay attention and read up on what AGI is going to do, all the meta claims, they have some aspect of it. I personally, I'm skeptical. Yes, it can happen. It will happen. It's inevitable. In terms of the timing of it, I mean, I'm thinking maybe next couple of years. Side note on this one too, I was in Boston talking to some of the experts, and I asked them this question about almost like 7 years ago, and they were talking to me. They said, "No, AGI is about 30 years, ahead. I mean, we're not going to get there." And now we're talking 2 to 3 years max, right? With
Yeah.
data centers booming and all that. So think about when the infer learning happens, all the AI that we use flips a switch and says, now I can infer. You teach me how to cook. I can cook anything in the world. You give me the recipe and I'll do it. right? If you teach me, therefore Tesla won't have to drive cars millions of miles to get the autopilot perfect. They're just going to drive them in the garage, take them out on the main street, and rest is all history, right? So that would
Yeah.
unlock the key. Now, there's actually one side note I do want to make for the listeners is one of the key challenges today when it comes to AI is the computational power and the energy consumption. So that is why you see a lot of investments coming into data centers and the energy sector. What will happen, and this is a question, and again, I'm going to leave it at that. I mean, there's a lot of discussion that I've had on this topic, but the question is, what would happen once the quantum becomes reality and quantum computing is real? It is happening. It will come to fruition pretty quick. So now you have two parallels, right? So you have the AGI taking effect, and then you have quantum computing coming in. Quantum solves the speed aspect, right? And the permutations of computations that you can do with it. And then the AGI takes over the inferences. Now you can put these two together and just think about what the future is going to be. And as Einstein said, truth is stranger than fiction.
That is such a good quote to end it off on, honestly, because the future is crazy to even think about when it comes to technology. And I feel like when you set the good baseline with the history, and when we think about that, I mean, you said like people were talking about it, oh, it's going to be here in 30 years. Now it's here in 2 to 3 years. The speed at, how it's changing is even the history itself is going to be changed. So
Yeah,
that is very cool.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and one other thing that you already noticed, the user expectations are changing and evolving, right?
Yeah.
Case in point, I'll give one quick example is, when Uber started, everybody was patient, right? When you order Uber first, I mean, there was an adoption curve, right? Why would I want to get into a private car? I don't even know this guy or gal. Why would I get in there? And now the human expectation, due to the automation and AI that's coming into place in the last couple of years, if if you order an Uber and if it takes more than 3 minutes, you get antsy. He's like, what the hell is going on? I need to just
Yeah.
cancel this, get another one. So the human expectation is I need something right away, right? Something
Mhm.
quick. And that is what ChatGPT is doing. And if you've noticed, one of the other trend is when was the last time you Googled, right? If you have a question.
I use ChatGPT. Yeah.
Exactly. Because it's right there, right? I mean, you don't have to go Google synthesize links, click on every one of them, look at it,
Yeah.
make a summary, and then come up with what you want to say. You just ask the question, yeah, I can give you the answer right away, and you can take that. So the human behavior is changing, human expectations are changing. Only the time will tell what will happen because nobody has a crystal ball.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, with all that said, I kind of want to switch gears to a
Sure.
little bit of advice towards the next generation specifically. So, to start off, if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of career advice, what would that be?
Learn more, read more, do more research. One thing I honestly, it happens to me quite often when I'm sitting in the meetings and talking to executives around the world or solving, client problem, that there is an aspect of I wish, geez, I knew more, right?
Yeah,
And perhaps it's an evolution, it's a learning journey. But I would say to younger generation is if you are good at something and you want to really become good at that, do your research, do your study, learn more, listen more. That's the advice that I would give younger self to me is
yeah,
read more, listen more, and learn more.
yeah. And I feel like that's all very true. And now the next gen kind of has this advantage with the whole AI, in place because research is a lot faster, learning could be a
Yeah,
lot faster. You don't
yes,
necessarily have to read through books anymore or listen to things. Like
yeah,
you can maybe even go on a podcast like this and listen to, what are we talking about today? Or throw it into chat and be like, give me a
correct.
synopsis of this.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there's so many other avenues now, and I feel like it's a lot faster.
yeah. You could use Google Notebook LM, right, to
Yeah.
convert your thesis and research into a podcast. Like you just upload, sources of documents that you have, and it's going to convert into an audio format podcast. And it's phenomenal the way it works. One other thing that I do want to caution, though, is a bit of a sort of a warning, if you will, is that the although ChatGPT and the tools like it, Claude and a bunch of other tools and Grok and everybody's
Yeah.
sort of coming, they're all coming into the mainstream. But there's a trade-off, and the trade-off is something that our listeners should be aware of, and that is cognitive decline. One other
Yes.
thing that if you've noticed, and as we kind of, that's why I kind of said is, I wish I'd read more. The Chat GPT, I mean, even if you know, so they say TLDR, too much, too long to read, right? So didn't read, too long, didn't read. The cognitive decline is happening in a sense where I'm not reading into what's been given to me, what's been given to me, what's being fed to me. And the fact that, I mean, I can now ask questions and it's repetitive. I can ask same questions multiple times. Lose the aspect of sort of your cognitive ability because I
Yeah.
remember back in the days, and I remember remembering like 20, at least 15 to 20 different phone numbers. And today I only know two max,
Yeah.
right? So, it's using these tools is absolutely necessary, but I would say as a caution is keep your memory sharp. And that happens is if you not just take what's given to you, but read, synthesize, validate, verify. It keeps you engaged with AI. And the other aspect of it is, one of the professor at one of my school, he said, Naj, you have to be nice to your models, right? In other words, when you're talking to them, you have to say please and you have to say good morning, which is another sort of a cautionary tale on its own. But to listeners, I would urge you to keep your memory sharp. And to do that, you definitely want to use new tools, but read what it's giving you, validate what's giving
Yes.
you. It's going to help you retain the essence of your reading, and it'll help you get more efficient in terms of asking how to use AI to AI.
Exactly. Exactly. For sure. And now, as we kind of wrap up this podcast, I wanted to ask one final question that we like to ask all of our guests, and that is for any emerging leaders who want to follow maybe a similar path to yours, what's one piece of advice you'd share about growing from a specialist in their field to now an executive?
Geez, there's a lot of them. There's a lot. Perhaps I would say something that's pretty universal is if you've made a commitment, follow through it. It may sound cliche, but I kid you not, we take it for granted. There are, I mean, again, hundreds of individuals I met where the commitment was made, but it wasn't followed through. I'm
Yeah.
guilty as charged in certain areas. But, again, if I could, advise even younger me back in the days, I would say the same thing. And if you want to get to a level where you can call yourself that you're a founder and executive in a certain area or that you're a value contributor to the world economy, if you commit to something, follow through it.
Absolutely. I feel like everyone needs to hear that very often because I'm also a person too that is, once I say something, I am committed to it. And I feel like once you follow through on your word, things will fall into place. And that's just how life goes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, again, like there's a lot of sort of variables around. I mean, one of the thing that my mentor taught me is this was in the sort of the defense time frame where they said is my name is my identity, my word is my brand, or the other way around. My name is my brand, my word is identity. Like either way you look at it is you really have to live those principles. And to do that is when you commit, you deliver. And that goes a long ways because it goes well for your client, for your success, for your revenue growth, whatever goals you have in mind, it's absolutely important. And one more thing I would add, I mean, this is something that I tell my coaches is dreaming big is important, but dreams without goals are nothing but disappointments. So always have
Um,
goals when you have dreams.
yes. Absolutely. And honestly, what a perfect way to end it off. Honestly, thank you so much for showing and sharing, your journey, all of these snippets. I know I have been taking mental notes this entire time, and I know our listeners will. So thank you so much again for being on the podcast. And yeah,
Pleasure to be here, Karina. Thank you. You've been a great host. Thank you very much. I'd love to contribute to more to your listeners. I hope our paths, cross again if there's any value I can add. But absolutely pleasure to be here. Thank you for the time.